Okay, I will jump in the Discord and catch everyone and do it the
Okay.
old-fashioned way, where I'll just say
Yeah.
if you're okay to share your screen at the same time as
Yeah.
streaming. Yeah,
Yeah. Let's do
awesome. Thank you
that.
so
Okay.
much. Okay, we're going like that
Yeah.
then. Hello, hello everyone. Sorry about the wait on that one. We're just checking out some
We had
streaming
technical
stuff,
issues.
technical bits. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, up and running now. Good to go. Yeah, I'm just gonna let you know that this is a Wednesday visit that we plan on quite regularly doing, like every couple of weeks. We're gonna have someone awesome on to do a masterclass. This week we've got the awesome Gloria the Animator. Yeah. Gloria's going to be showing us some shader stuff, as you probably know.
I will
But
teach you how to do algebra, and you will not complain about it.
awesome, yeah. From a very like, you got some very interesting setup for teaching this. It looks like so it's going to be really really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, just want to let people know that these are going to be on pretty regularly, and we plan on getting people on in all different kinds of doing cool stuff, not just using the Off World Live Toolkit, but everything around and beyond it, sort of thing. So, yeah, as we started a little bit late, I'll let you just get on with it, Gloria, if you
Yes.
like.
Thank you. So
And people can watch that stream.
I would like to do a little introduction. So, as you can see, this is my beautiful ArtStation account. I am usually a character modeler, but I gotta say, I really like making shaders, and the vector math is just quite a lot of fun to me. So, I'm definitely gonna be posting more shaders and expanding my portfolio with them. But today, hopefully, I can get most of you started with the basics and intermediates, and maybe even more experts on how to, think when doing shaders and how to, get any kind of look you want. Because, like, the theory here is very simple. We're just controlling the pixels we see on the screen, making them darker, making them colored, making them lighter, all that stuff. So, let me get my slide here. So, I think we should start with a few simple questions. So, first one, what is RGB, right? Well, RGB is a simple term for red, green, and blue. Most of you probably know that. But each one of those is actually a float value. Now, a float value is a value that has a 0 behind it. So, like 1.5 or 0.25 and numbers like that. Compared to integers or constants, those would be just flat numbers like 0, 1, 5, 7, and floats can always have, an ending behind them and therefore be very smoothly transitioned. So every RGB is a float of itself. So you have R as a float, you have G as a float, and you have B as a float value. And those combine to make colors and display those colors on your screen. And of course, with math and shaders, we can control them. So, what is XYZ now? Well, XYZ is quite the same as RGB. The only difference is that they do not display color on your screen. They display the position of the mesh on your screen and where to show the mesh. And we can use these position values, which are also floats, surprisingly, to, have special vectors and special ways the image appears on the mesh. So speaking of vectors, what is a vector, right? Well, it's kind of a weird concept, but a vector is basically something that tells your 3D mesh on how to render an image or an input data that it gets. Should it render it in screen space, in UV space, maybe in some kind of rotating vector space, and that kind of stuff. And a mesh, as most of you know, is just a bunch of vertices connected in all kinds of places that make up the 3D mesh. Because without those vertices, you don't have a 3D mesh, you have a virtual mesh. And another important thing to know is, what is a bitmap? well, a bitmap usually refers to non-vector textures. So basically an image that has a certain amount of pixels, and each one of those pixels has certain amounts of 3-float data. So maybe that one pixel has a bit more G in it or a bit less B in it, and just, calibrating the colors and to display you a beautiful image of your dog or something. So yeah, today I will be breaking down my galaxy shader in quite a lot more detail for those who haven't seen it, and that is how this looks. And it also looks very interesting in motion when you move the screen around, because instead of using the traditional, as it is known, UV space, I told it to use the screen space. And what that happens is that it's just displaying the textures, like literally on the screen as if it was a cutout, instead of, warping the texture around the object like most maps do. So, the images I've used for this material are some images I generated myself using some Clip Studio brushes. And I basically have like one smoke and another smoke, and then I have 2 galaxy stars. So one is a bit bigger and one's a bit smaller, just so we can have some variety in there. So now I know to a lot of you this might look very very complicated, but you don't have to look at the whole picture, right? The whole picture is right here. It's the preview. But what is important is looking at each one of these and figuring out what it does. So Unreal actually has a pretty sweet feature where you can just right-click on things and preview them. So you can isolate everything else. Like, isolate everything else so it doesn't get in your way. So you can just see what is going on in here. So, I'll explain to you what is going on in here. So, here I have my texture, right? And my texture is, as I showed you before, just a smoke. But the thing what makes it move is actually these rotators and panner nodes. So, first of all, I'm using screen-aligned UVs because this gives me a screen space vector. And I think just the screen space effect makes this effect work much better than using traditional generated or UV map vectors. And here, I can scale it universally because you see every single input is connected to here. So if I, adjust this parameter, I can either scale the whole image down or upwards. Here I have another scale to adjust the vector. And then I have 2 panner nodes, one panner and one rotator node. So this basically, pans it at a certain speed. We can even change it. So it goes at a different speed. See, now it's going mostly up. So you can just adjust these to your liking and make them go into the direction you want. And because both of these are just different versions of the vector data, like the only thing these 2 nodes do is actually offset and add to your vector. So all I had to do to make them work together, instead of one dominating the other, is just, add them together. Like 1 + 1 = 2, easy. And then I'm using that as my vector input. And we're basically getting this smoke effect here. But of course it's a black and white texture, so how do I color it? Well, this power node actually doesn't do anything. I don't know why I kept it here, but if you adjust it, you can either add more contrast or remove more contrast. So it's kind of like a gamma, I'd say. But if you keep it to 1, it does nothing, because it's kind of like multiply, right? If you multiply 10 by 1, you just get 10. Nothing changes. but the way I'm coloring it is by using overlay. Now, overlay is actually a really, really interesting function. The way it basically works is if you put gray on top of gray, it's not gonna do anything. But if you put like gray on top of black, if you put black on top of gray, it's actually gonna darken it, and if you do the same but with white, it's gonna lighten it. So it's kind of like adding and multiplying at the same time, depending on the original layer and the layer you're putting on top. So what this does is actually it creates a very simple way to color things. So here we have Krita. I made this little image for you to demonstrate what happens. So remember how I mentioned that these colors on our screen, they're just 3 RGB colors? Well, each one of these is a float and it can be isolated. So here we have our 3 colors that we can blend between. And for example, if I color this as red, right? If I color this as red, and then I put this on overlay, what happens is, well, it's colored, right? It's colored the same color as we want it to. And if we color it with white, it's gonna get darker. And if we color it with black, it will get blacker than the original. So, yeah. But the interesting thing is you can actually isolate each one of these layers and see exactly what happens. So because we don't, nothing happens here. But with the green, you can see that the green channel gets affected quite a lot in here. Like, this is practically white. That is because we added to this gray value, right? This gray value would be approximately 0.3 in darkness. And then if we add 1 on top of it, well, it becomes a bit more than 1. And if something is 1 or more, your computer will display it as a white color. You can see for the red value, it's pretty much the same. You know, this is the red channel, it brightened up here, but this is only pure green, so nothing happened. And you can kind of combine all those two and see the changes, you know? It's quite interesting, don't you think? So that's basically how I colored these things, these black and white textures. Now, because of the special way that overlay works, you can actually use it to combine normal maps together. Because see this purple value here that you always see on normal map, it's RGB 0.5. Every single one of those 3 floats is set to 50%. So it's technically a perfectly gray value, right? And because of that, you can do this, and there you go. Perfectly combined normal map. So that's the trick I use quite a lot. So the rest of this is just, you know, the same stuff, just with a little bit of different values for the animation and a little bit of a different color. This as well. I used a different texture here, and of course a little bit of a different here. This multiply, I believe I used to scale things up and down. Yeah, see, if we make this number bigger, it scales up. If we make it smaller, it scales down. So you can actually multiply your vector to scale things up or down. And yeah, here's the 4th one. Now, the way I combined these is by using the add function. So I basically took both of them and I added them together. I didn't make them override each other. I made them, you know, when they meet, they're gonna create a brighter color than usually. And, you know, once you add all 4 of them, it starts to look, I mean, pretty good. No, it's almost looking like a galaxy. We just need like a few more things in it, you know? So what I did here is I used the power function. You can look up the formula for that. It's quite interesting, but I can't read formulas. I just kind of look at the description. But yeah, every function here is just simple math function you usually learn in high school. So the power node, as you can see, it darkens things. Or if we make it lower, it makes them brighter. So you can adjust it how you want to get a different darkness or brightness. And now the galaxy effect is pretty dark, right? Like, they don't really look like they're glowing. Well, worry not, because that's where my favorite multiply node comes in. Like, this math function is literally the best math function ever invented by the person who invented it. But basically, see this blue right here? That is a pretty dark value. That value has a percentage of around like 30 or 20. So let's say 0.2, right? What happens when you multiply 0.2 by 20? You get a very big number. And the bigger the number, the brighter it looks. So when we multiply it all together, you see it looks quite gorgeous. I can slowly multiply it up so you can see the differences. See, it just becomes brighter, brighter, and brighter. Because we keep multiplying it until those values reach either 1 or more. Some 3D engines can actually handle a value of more than 1, but they'll usually output it as a glowing thing, so you can put a glare on top, which is pretty nice, you know, it makes that glowy effect. That's pretty much it. It's really not that complex, is it? And now let's talk about the stars. They're following quite a very similar idea, but with some sort of masking going on, which I will demonstrate. So, let's get our star texture. So, oh, sorry, I hit my mic. So, here's the star texture. I know it's nothing special right now, but once we add a few more things to it, and a few more nodes, it's gonna look amazing. So first of all, of course, I'm using screen space, so I can move everything around and the thing is gonna stay in space because it looks pretty cool. Screen space effect, it feels very magical. And then I multiply this, because when you multiply, things either become a bit bigger or a bit smaller. I think I should have actually put a global multiplier in here so I could control all 3 of these. Just, you know, plug a constant in here. But this shader is mostly intended to be viewed from like a certain distance to the camera, so, you know, I didn't have to do that. And also, one of these stars is way too big for some reason. Oh, would you look at that? It's this one. Let's fix it up. There you go. Multiply value of 2 fixes it right up. Maybe we can make it 5. Oh wait, is it also multiplying the speed of it? It is. Well, that is to be expected. So you is multiplying both of these coordinates. So if I wanted to adjust this size, I just, you know, probably plug in another multiplier in here like that. So now we have a unique one to control the size. And let's just save the shader, you know, make sure you don't lose your progress. And, well, there you go. We no longer have that one big annoying star. That's obviously way too big. Yeah, just a little bug I didn't notice earlier. Yeah. And then we have the third star layer. And I kind of made them go like in a triangular way. So one star is going that way, the other is going that way, and the other one's going that way, kind of. And again, we use the add function to combine them two, because I'm basically adding 0 plus 1, which becomes 1. So yeah, that's how we managed to combine all the stars. Now, they're not sparkling. And here they are sparkling. I will show you why they're sparkling. They're sparkling because of the beautiful overlay function. So to make them sparkle, I had to make some kind of mask. And at first my idea was to take like one star and scale it up and down and then somehow multiply those. But because of the way computers read 2D images, that wasn't possible. Because you see, there is something called a tiled texture. Right? So here's an example of a tiled texture. You have your one square, and then that square gets infinitely, you know, tiled. Here's another example. And the original idea was to have like that one thing and scale it in and out. Now, the problem with scaling it in and out is that the tiles would either be denser or less dense, which, you know, wasn't looking desirable. So then I turned off the tiling, and what happened is I couldn't multiply it because there's no other to do it other than tiling, blah, blah, blah. It was a dumb idea, but a friend suggested me to use a mask like this. So what I'm doing to make the star sparkle is just using an overlay mask between black and white. So this is how the actual mask looks like. We could actually maybe scale it up a bit more. I think we could use this value to do that. Oh no, that's the animation value. Oh yeah, we can scale it here. Oh, that's not really working. Anyways, that's not the point. So basically, this is how the mask looks. I kind of want it to be more blurrier, but it does the job mostly. So I'll just keep it. Oh wait, I think I found the actual scale. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Now that's good. So I like to have these masks kind of really big so they cover most of the object, because that just looks kind of better. So basically, let me show you why this works. It's because every star has a very specific look, right? See, it has a gradient to it. Like this star is very bright in the middle, but then it kind of gradients out to the side. And I obviously use the overlay function. And what that allowed me to do is when it comes in contact with, you know, a black color, all these grays here basically become completely black. So they're no longer visible. And when it comes in contact with a white value, the star becomes even brighter. So that's how I'm able to shrink it in and out to kind of look like it's sparkling. So to actually make this mask, I used a procedural texture. It's called noise. And I animated it with a time node and a little bit of multiply. This is how fast it goes. And this is what vector position it's using. So that way we kind of get like a procedural object that doesn't have any seams, which is good because seams are not pleasant. And, you know, it just looks pretty cool. But as you can see, when we combine it with an overlay, those stars start to sparkle in and out. See that? Pretty nice. So then the last thing was basically to make those stars glow a lot. So I made them glow a lot. And this actually caused a little bit of a problem, which I'll show you. Do you see some of those are black? There's like this weird offset on them. Well, that is because of stuff I can't quite comprehend, but it has something to do with the values being a bit more than 1 by default on those stars, and then it kind of makes the computer go crazy. So what I just did is I just clamped it, you know? I made sure that there's no minus value. So if something is, for example, a float of -1 or -5, is gonna be converted to a 0. Because as soon as we introduce a minus value in here, the stuff just goes crazy. Like, everything just goes bad. And then I made the brightest value be a number of 2. And then we multiply that brightest value of 2 by a value of 15, and we get 30. So the maximum brightness of these stars on your computer is 30 pretty much. And then we add it together with the sky. Again, using my favorite add node, my second favorite. And that's the material. Yep. It's quite simple, and we still have 30 minutes, so
Super cool.
so I think I could break down another material perhaps that I made.
We gotta wing it from here.
What did you say?
I just said we're winging it from here.
Yeah,
I love the
pretty
use of
much.
the noise to make the stars get brighter and darker. That's a really nice trick.
Yeah. Overlay is a really, really magical node, and I do recommend everybody play around with blend modes to know what they do, because blend modes are just essentially math functions for RGB floats. So I should have a little slide for blend modes. So for those who have, opened Photoshop, Clip Studio, or Krita, or Paint Tool Sai, you're gonna know that, like, you have those layers, but every layer can have its own blend mode, and you're like, what the fuck even is that, right? Well, they're basically just math functions that tell that layer, should it brighten the layer under, should it darken it, or stuff like that. So yeah. There are many blend modes, but they're just basic RGB math. There's actually on Wikipedia like a whole list on every single blend mode and its formula, and a little description on what it does if you cannot read formulas like me. So yeah, it's quite useful. So there's darkening modes, which usually multiply or subtract your float values, your RGB values. There are lightening modes, which add or multiply in a positive manner. And there are contrast modes, which do both at once, depending on how they function. And then there's like comparative modes, which kind of flip things. And then there is the composite modes, which are very specific in what they do to each float value. They might change their hue, they might make their saturation stronger, change their luminosity value, or just plain color value. So these are mostly for coloring. So lots of blend modes. How about we check out my holographic shader that I did in Blender a while ago, because that one it's quite simple, but I think it will blow a few people's minds on how simple it actually is. So I just gotta wait for Blender to load. Oh, my computer is on the edge of overheating. Oh no, that's what summer does to you. So yeah, I'll just close this for now, and later we can take questions on all the shaders I do and stuff. So, I gotta find it. I have a lot of stuff with me. Ah, there it is. The holographic shader. Oh, here I was actually showing a student in how to do the rotator node and the panner node in Blender, because sadly Blender doesn't have that node, and I think that's just a really cool node. So this is my holographic shader. It's like a third shader I've ever published, I think, and it's inspired by like those nail polishes you see that are really pretty and they like glow like the rainbow. So I tried using the basic idea on how this material works, and what I noticed is that right? Like, you know that little white dot on things? That's called the specular. And if the object is shiny, if it has a low roughness, that specular dot is gonna be really sharp. It's gonna be really tiny, and it's not gonna be blurry. And what I noticed is around the specular that the rainbow would always appear. It would always appear around the specular, nowhere else. So where the light hits it, it distorts it into a rainbow a little bit there. So I'll show you how I managed to do it. Now, you want to keep one thing in mind is that this shader, it's not actually physically accurate because it depends a lot on how bright your lights are in the scene. Because if they're kind of too bright, too tiny, it's gonna just shrink out and show you a red, which is not the best. But yeah, if your lights are sufficiently bright, you can get a pretty good holographic effect going on. So I'll show you what I did here, because it's not complex. And that's my node setup. It's much smaller than the Galaxy shader in Unreal, and obviously it's much simple due to that. So we don't have a preview in Blender, so instead we're gonna have to resort to just plugging in the channel and waiting it to compile. But basically this is what I have, right? I'm using this as my gradient mask. So what this practically is just a principled color, right? Good old principled BSDF. I have changed some values. I went over the top with some values because it does help. So I had this on 10. And yeah, so I'm using this as my black and white mask. And then I'm actually using Fresnel. For those who don't know, Fresnel is basically this effect that happens in the real world. Is when object is facing, and it's you can kind of use more technically here to just isolate and have a black and white mask. So I basically took this Fresnel in here. I multiplied it a little to have it a bit sharper. And then I subtracted. So what I was doing here is basically, see those grays values I have here? Wait a moment. Right, so you see these gray values here? Well, they were actually interfering with the rainbow effect, so I had to find a way to basically cut out these edges because I didn't want the rainbow to be on the edges. So I used the Fresnel, and as you saw, the edges were white, and because they were white, because basically what we're doing here is taking this gray value of 0.5 and we are basically minusing it by 1 or 1.5. So, you know, what happens if you do 0.5 minus 1.5? You get less than a 0. And less than a 0 means that your computer will render that as pure black. So that's how I was able to isolate. But yeah, this came very useful because then I took this, you know, gray mask of things and I pushed it through a color ramp. And that basically allowed me to color those in-between color values very gently to make sure that they're just right where they have to be. Input. So what I decided to do is just use an alpha here. So you can see this is transparent. And I'm just pushing that through a couple nodes. So first it goes through a lightening node, which kind of helps it be a bit brighter and prettier. I'll turn up my fans just a bit more so it goes a bit faster. So yeah. And so you can see we can change the color of the original material while still keeping our rainbow on top of things no matter what happens, which I think is very, very important. Now, the only problem is when you kind of go on a gray value, it's a bit too soft, right? So what I did is I just told it to, you know, use that mask and make this rainbow like the same super saturated values as we have on the color ramp. So our final effect looks like that. You got it, Blender. There you go. So now our rainbow is always very saturated. Because remember our alpha mask? Yeah. Everywhere where the rainbow does not shine is complete black. So nothing gets affected there. But where the rainbow does exist, the alpha value is opaque. It is white. So things do get affected. So I'm able to use this to, you know, tell the rainbow to just be 100% saturation. So pretty much here, the rainbow will be very, very saturated. Actually even did like a little like, you know, 3D map here to add a little bit of detail, because I just think that helps to make it a bit more realistic. But that's how it will look if you have it completely smooth. I just like to have that little bit of like distortion. Just makes it look natural, right? And that's that's pretty much how the material works. See, it's simple. Vector math and RGB math is nothing to be afraid of. All you gotta do is just remember that you're calculating those individual pixels dynamically. So you have inputs to help you mask where you want to affect them and how you want to affect them with math and different blend modes, and also a bit of vector stuff, which I would like to get into, because my glass shader, which some of you might have seen, got released like last week. And I actually spent like 3 hours figuring out a custom math for it. Because I really wanted the gradient to stay in place when you move the objects up and down. So yeah, I kind of figured it out the hard way. So here you have your notes and tips. You can get this for free on Gumroad right now. And I just want to adjust the gradient right now so you can kind of see what it does. We can adjust the height of the gradient well. So I want to scale this a bit and make it pretty sharp. There we go. So now let me show you what different vectors do, because that is pretty important. So here we have our good old Suzanne, and we have a good old square, and I'm gonna old cube, you know, be sure. And what else could we summon in here? How about a torus? Why not? So we can see a bit more what is actually happening. Maybe it will help us visualize a little bit more. Oh, the torus is not working. That is interesting. I'll just remove it. I don't have time to troubleshoot it. Okay, so that's the glass shader. Now you can see that the gradient stays in place even when you move the object up and down, right? And that's because of very interesting math I'll get into in just. I have a lot of things here, and I swear most of these are simply for calculating the vector. So I'm gonna sadly have to remove that and summon a material output node here and try to explain to you what the hell even is vectors, because those things are kind of confusing, and even to me they take hours to figure out how I want them to act. So basically, what I did here is I to get the shine, right? Just gotta remove that and we should be able to see what's happening, right? So I used this noise map here to know what's happening. And of course, we use the color ramp to make it white. And you see, the way it moves is special. That is because I used a special vector. So what I'm using here is camera data, which means I'm using screen space. So this image is just basically plopped on my screen. So like this purple, it stays on the exact same pixels on my screen as it was moments ago. The only thing that's moving is the object. The pixels, those purple, are staying right there. And I have some math here, so you can of it here. And the only reason I have this on multiply because I had to get a really specific value of 360, and for some reason it just wasn't happening. So yeah, most of these nodes here just to like make sure that the output value, the input value that you're inputting makes sense to the user. So here we have our scale, which we can adjust in any way we want. So, we can either scale it up or scale it down. Remember, the smaller the number, the bigger the image usually is. And the bigger the number, the denser the image usually is. So, that's basically our special vector for the thingy here. And then, we just make sure it's a good color. And then we make it go through a lot of contrast nodes. So, we get that nice shine here that we can later adjust. Goes through a mix node. I don't remember why. And yeah, it gets added in with the gradient because this is actually only a mask right now. So all this black and white, it's not the actual thing. The actual thing is the materials. See, I can plug in any material I want here. So we can have one material for the other, another material for the other color. So that's how a mask works. It's kind of like a boolean where you can have 0 be like a pink material and like a 1 to be like some kind of interesting blue material. So, once we're combining with the mask, it just works. There we go. It's looking black right now because the input material is not functioning. This is not how this shader is supposed to work. But yeah, here I have an input from the outside. So you can actually choose your emission color and make it whatever you want. And now let me show you the interesting thing with the gradient, right? The gradient has a lot of modes. It actually has 4 modes. It even can choose which vector system we actually want to use. And it only works if my output thing is right there. So, yeah. I just wish Blender had the preview thing like Unreal does, because I'm telling you, that's really nice. Oh no, did we break it? Oh, right. Group output. It's not working because it's not outputting anything. It's outputting a nothing. There we go. So now it works. So, our first vector system is called UV space. Now, most of you know that the UV space depends on your UVs that you have right here. So when we move the UVs, we move the gradient and how the gradient looks around. So that's the basic system. It works well for things like flat objects like glass, because then you can make sure that the gradient stays in the same place everywhere. But yeah, it doesn't really work for other objects as well, because you can see the Suzanne here is, her eyes are really popping, and so are the ears. So then we have another system, which is local space, which is my version on screen space, basically. So this is screen space. Basically, with screen space, as I said before, the pixels stay exactly where you put them. So you can see that it just stays right there, and there's nothing you can do about them. So when you move the object, it either completely fades out or stays really, really bright. See, I'm like moving the screen, it goes in and out. So that method may be desirable for some projects, but not for this one. So here's my local space. Oh. Ah, yes, we need to take our height. Now, the local space, it kind of works like screen space, but it makes sure that your gradient doesn't fall. So I've actually did like a lot of vector math for it. And I was just like doing it in the car, doing it at meetings, because I had nothing else to do. And I really cannot explain this, because at this point I just don't quite remember how it works. But basically, when you move the object up, right, it gets offset downwards. So it's technically screen space, but it's being offsetted by your object position. So you make sure that the gradient stays on the right place on the object. But it's not UV because you can see the monkey eyes are not popping like they were on the UV. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting method, and it really took me a while to figure this out. So really, this is for advanced users only. So you can download the shader and try to figure this out bit by bit and have a cool little puzzle. But yeah, I was just basically calculating blues, greens, mixing them, subtracting them, trying to get those colors to be right. And then we have, of course, the last one, screen space. And the third one is your custom vector input, so you can input any kind of vector system you want. I just did this so advanced users could have a better time working with this shader, instead of like having to go into this mess and figuring out what to do. So yeah, but yeah, the gradient is basically just I believe a simple coordinate, like an object coordinate, and yeah, it just stays as a black and white value. So I've converted my 3D RGB vector into a grayscale image, and that's how it was working. So that is the beautiful shader that you can adjust however you please, that I am very proud of. You can even remove the gradient completely if you'd like. But yeah, a lot of these nodes here are actually to enable all these features I've put into the shader. Because, you know, why not? More features means more people will get excited about it. So, yeah, I like it. Now, does any...
Yeah, if people have got questions, they can add them in the voice channel notes.
Yeah.
I'll also look at...
Yeah, you can just type them in.
If they like to.
So, I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions.
Like, yeah, I was wondering like how, because you seem to like understand like exactly what every function does, and that helps you do something really specific. Like,
yes.
How do you go about tackling? You're like, oh, like you kind of explained it with how you made the kind of specular holographic type thingy. But was there a bit of like experimentation there to find?
Well, there's the very important part of concepting how your shader works. See, that galaxy shader is actually I only made it because I took a commission that had this effect on the concept art. So I was like, how cool it would be to kind of make something special. And yeah, I kind of had to figure it out And what I did is I just laid in bed, I looked at the scene, and I tried to think how could I overlay images on top of one another to create that effect. And then I just kept brainstorming as I make that shader. And it, turned out to be how I wanted to look. Exactly the right sizes, the right colors, and all that stuff. So brainstorming is really important, and that leads to the great subject is that imagination and inspiration is your absolute best friend, because it's really hard to make a shader when you can't even imagine how it looks or how you want it to function, right? Like, if you cannot imagine how your shader should look or how it should act, you're never gonna come up with the math to do it because you don't even know what you want to do in the first place. So a good practice would basically be to copy like other advanced shaders that people made and kind of, like reverse engineer how they did it. And then from there on, you're gonna be like a master of RGB math and know exactly what you're doing. And then you can make rendering for anything. So imagining how it should look is really important, and then figuring out how things overlay. I think a good practice is really to just go into Photoshop or something like that and just mess around with the blend modes. And then move the images around and see what happens when you actually animate one on top of the other. What kind of effects do you get? So that is important. Drawing a bit of Unreal a try. Well, inspiration is great. Is there a resource for finding math functions you mentioned before in Unreal Engine for the node functions, like what was used here? Most functions are like named universally because they are math. So, it's like multiply will always be multiply because that's how everyone calls it. So there's no special naming conventions for different programs, which makes doing things a lot easier because overlay is the same kind of overlay as an Unreal Engine, and subtract, they're all the same functions, which really makes things easy. So yeah, I did send a Wikipedia link which mentions a lot of the blend modes, and usually in Unreal, the way you find them is by right-clicking and just, typing in overlay, blend, or some kind of blend like that. So most of the blend modes are going to be called blend and then their function like overlay or multiply or something like that. And in Blender, the way you get those is by using the mix RGB node. So this is a mix RGB node, right? Oops, I accidentally plugged it in. And basically your bottom layer goes here, your top layer goes here, and this is your mask value or your opacity value. And you can basically pick whatever blend mode you want from this. I'm sure you can find every single one of these blend modes in Unreal as well. So, yeah, they all do different things, so you can read the Wikipedia article on the blend modes. They have a math formula for each one and a description, a definition on what it does technically. So it's really useful. Or you can just play around with them, put two images together on overlay, maybe something's cool gonna happen. Oh, I thought maybe there was more going on where you actually had to input math like in Blender sometimes. Yeah, kinda. Is there a way to write code instead of nodes to shaders in Unreal? I do not know if there is, but there should be, because there are other shading writing systems like GLTL or something, where it's like, it's the same stuff, it's just in a different language that you write in a text pad. So yeah, you could find a way to write shaders by actual code, because most of that will allow you to use the same functions, like input the same images. The only thing that's really different, I guess, is the way visually it shows you your code. Unity allows that though, but I'm not sure how Unreal handles. Yeah, Unity does seem to have only written shaders, but I don't really play in Unity much. It'd be kind of nice to learn it, but I just don't have the time for that these days. Oh, let's see if I can find another cool shader to show. Ah, there we go. So this is a little shader I made for a student to explain to them how things work. And yeah, it's really nothing special. It's just combining things on top of another. You see, it's a nice little tree of just putting one layer on top of another. Fresnel to give a little cool highlight. We have a little additive here, which basically just takes highlight data, puts it through a color ramp, and adds it on top. Then we have some tune data to, you know, also basically take black and white map, put it through a color ramp, and do tune shading stuff with it. And then our actual texture here, which is just the test texture. I just put it to be desaturated. Yeah. So you see, making shaders is easy. You just have to know what you want to do and what inputs and outputs are available to you to control them and color them in however you want. Like, really, making shaders is just painting using math. Just painting with math, really.
In Photoshop to kind of see the effects quicker, and then
Yeah.
then you can see it happening before you.
Yeah, you
and
can really brainstorm your
recreate that in
shaders
3D
and
software.
programs like that.
Nice way to do it.
Yeah. You know, you just draw one thing on top of another and then put it through a bunch of blend modes. Because that's how I did my Galaxy shader. I just put one blend mode on top of another, and, you know, just all has its little groups and then group until you get something really cool looking. Also, really enjoyed the mixed media approach you have of Photoshop and the 3D
really
engine
nice
for
trick.
I kind of been doing like blend modes a lot. Like when I was young little lass, I used to play in like a software called paint.net, and it basically was like the first thing that introduced me to blend modes. And then I kind of got Photoshop behind every single one of them. But like I just have so much experience that I can predict what they do. Oh yeah, Krita is also a great way to brainstorm that, or Clip Studio. Because I gotta say, personally, I don't like Photoshop, and it's been out of my computer for over 6 months now, and I'm very glad and happy. So yeah, I use Krita and Clip as my replacements if I need to. So yeah. Oh yes, I would like to mention that I do teach Blender. I am a private Blender teacher. So if you would like to sign up for my classes of shader making, maybe making clothes in Marvelous, general stuff like that, you know, I could teach you privately and really like focus on what you're struggling with. So yes, please, I need more students. Krita is great for alternative for sure. Also surprisingly okay for 2D animation. Yeah, like I used Create a little bit for a storyboarding to have a quick animation, and I just like Krita does a better job than Grease Pencil. But it's mostly because Grease Pencil is in 3D space, so it's kind of hard to set up. So, does anybody have more shader related questions? Maybe some ideas that I should polish up or didn't express too well? Any
Well, if
question.
you do, feel free to at Gloria in our Discord or here up in Discord.
Yeah.
Or
You can just DM me on Discord. I'm always
link to
here.
all Gloria's stuff in the comments. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
thanks so
shall
much for
link
that,
all
Gloria.
my
Yeah.
social media links so people can find more cool stuff I do and maybe sign up to my classes. And